Now, in this video, I'm going to be talking about hill climbing and how to go faster and how to pace short hill climb races or efforts, or maybe just you want to go faster up your local climb. We're going to be specifically talking about short climbs, generally less than 3 minutes, although 3 minutes can still be an awful long time. Now, when it comes to racing and pushing yourself up short climbs, every second does literally count because you don't spend a lot of time on the climb, and anything you do or get wrong could have a drastic impact on your finishing time. Now, just to preface, much of what I say in this video going to be quite general. Everybody is different, and for example, the riders that I coach and that I'm helping through this hill climb season here in the UK in the next month, much of their pacing strategies are individualized, much like their training. And before we get any further, if you're enjoying this video with the tips, the insights, and some of the old race footage on top, then consider giving it a like, subscribe if you're new, and sharing it with a friend who also enjoys smashing it up some climbs. Now, first and foremost, you will need to know your limits, much like any kind of race you do. And that's where either testing or doing frequent max efforts really helps. Now, you may already be familiar with critical power testing, probably already familiar with functional threshold power, but to give you an explanation of critical power, quite simply, riding above your critical power means you're going harder than what your body can sustain aerobically. So you start using your limited anaerobic energy reserve, also known as the W prime or functional reserve capacity, depending on what sort of model you're using. You've all heard the analogy. It's like having a battery, and that battery is just draining the more time you spend above critical power. Now, in a hill climb, it's actually smart to ride above critical power, especially if there's certain sections that are steeper and shallower, but then it pays to be careful and ride to the terrain and allow yourself to not drain that battery too quickly. So if you have a flatter section, you can dial it back slightly, and heck, if it even goes downhill, or if you have a corner that you have to slow down for, even uphill, then it pays to pay attention to how much effort and power you are putting in. You want to aim to reach the top of the climb, essentially completely empty. But you already know that. The hard bit is doing it just right. And to be honest, even after 5, 6, 7, 10, 15 years of doing this, you pretty much nearly always finish a hill climb thinking you've got something left. It's not always the case, but sometimes the case. So this balance of knowing just how much you can push, how much power you can sustain, and how much time you have left to complete the climb is what makes pacing and riding above critical power so important. Now, functional threshold power and critical power are not exactly the same. For many riders, they might be fairly similar, but critical power is often ever so slightly higher than FTP. It is also generally a bit more precise in allowing you to predict outcomes, performances, and performances over certain time durations. However, as I said earlier, if you're the type of person who's maybe already doing a lot of maximum hill efforts or riding out and doing hill climb races, then you already have a pretty good idea of what you're capable of doing without necessarily needing to do any formal testing. It's why I often tell people that testing is not always needed, especially in this day and age. Sometimes it just confirms what you already know. So pacing wise, for shorter hill climbs, we're talking about 2 minutes, 3 minutes, but definitely less than that. It can help to start a bit harder than the average power you think you can hold. That's because, well, one, you need to get up to speed quite quickly, because in a quite short race, acceleration, the time it takes to get off the line and get up to speed, it actually makes up, a significant portion of the race itself. The other point to make is that you'll only really start to feel fatigue as you're getting quite close to the end of the climb. If you're doing a 10-mile time trial, for example, and you start suffering 5 miles in, well, you've got an awful long way to go to suffer. With a shorter hill climb, as I said, you've got less time until that pain is over. Even if your power drops by a little bit, it's not going to drastically impact your overall time. That's as long as you don't completely blow up. And of course, if you start too easy, much like the first point, the climb is quite short, so there's not going to be enough time for you to make up time later on the climb. Now, all of these are kind of dependent on the type of climb, headwind, weather conditions. If the climb has significant steep parts or shallow parts, then of course you will have to change your pacing strategy. But generally speaking, if you're doing a climb that's pretty much the same gradient the whole way or very little gradient changes, then your best bet is to keep a fairly steady, flat pace profile. Of course, you can start a little bit harder, of course, to get off the line or to roll into the climb with a bit of speed, but not too much. There is a fine line, and that's where knowing your limits and just being disciplined to ride to them is where it's really going to pay off. So a great way to plan your pacing strategy is to go out and to find a climb that's going to be very similar to that one race, or maybe it is the same climb that you want to do a personal best on, and then go out and do a maximum effort on that climb. See what you're capable of doing, gather the data, just like when you do formal testing. It's not always a case of trying to be better every time you test. It's all about gathering data and finding out what kind of shape you're in. Don't forget that the physiological cost of actually going that deep on a one-off effort can be quite large, quite significant. So don't underestimate going into doing one of these max efforts. Don't underestimate the damage it can do, and don't also be disappointed if you don't PB or get a PR when you do test or when you do hit that climb to gather some data, because look at it in a way that it's going to help serve you in your training going forward in the next few weeks. Look at it as a way of, this is the goal, this is the target now, this is what I want to improve on. Try and put a positive spin on it. So once you've done that 2 or 3 minute max effort on that climb and you're satisfied, take the average power from that and then think to yourself, if I add 1 or 2% to this, is that something that I could realistically maintain during a race or on the day where I really want to go for it, when I've had all that caffeine, I've had the beta-alanine, I've had the bicarb, I've warmed up properly? Would I realistically be able to do a couple of percent more? Now, a question I do sometimes get asked is what's the difference between seated and standing? Is one better than the other? I'm the type of rider that'll stay seated on all the climbs, every climb, all day long. Or when I'm really pushing as hard as I can, I'll get out of the saddle. There's other riders, of course, that will be out of the saddle all the time, constantly, they never sit down. But it's very much personal preference. However, if you are a rider that sits down a lot, just be aware of it. And just like myself, think about how you can incorporate getting out the saddle a bit more as part of these efforts, because generally you'll be able to produce a bit more power over shorter durations by being out of the saddle and using all your body weight and your upper body strength to lever yourself up the climb. Likewise, if you're doing shallower but still short climbs, you've got to think about aerodynamics. Think about staying seated. Think about seeing if you can get as much power out as you can, but whilst also being a little bit more aerodynamic over that shorter, harder effort. So hopefully this video has given you a little bit of an idea as to how to pace and get the best out of yourself over short climbs and short, hard efforts. And in summary, having your pacing strategy dialed is a massive advantage to have over someone that is just going out there and throwing caution to the wind. And in most cases, I would recommend to people to find out what they're capable of doing and then just basically try and keep a rather flat pacing strategy with very small changes to that power output, depending on the wind, the weather conditions, and any changes of gradient on that climb. I hope you found something useful from this video. It's been really cool to look back through some of my old hill climb footage to use over this video as well. And also let me know in the comments below what your favorite length of climb is. I'm really curious to know. That's it for this video. I'll catch you soon.